welcome to the 1990 Formula One Winter Testing Report, brought to you by Microprose and GP2Joey. In the 13 weeks or so since the final Grand Prix of last year in Adelaide, Australia, the world of Formula One has not stopped. Sure, there's been no racing to speak of, but for every one of the 20 teams entered for this year, the winter months have been anything but quiet. New cars have been created, engines redesigned and mapped, changes in personnel, in the cockpits and in the garages, and now is the time we finally get to see who's got things right from those who haven't. With all teams required to participate in at least one day of each of the 3 official test sessions planned at Paul Ricard, Jerez and Imola, the 10 days have shed a little more light on the potential form guide before the first race in America. First off was sunny Paul Ricard in the south of France, where on the opening day of winter testing, Ayrton Senna topped the times for Ferrari, with the McLarens of defending champion Alain Prost and former champ Nelson Piquet not too far behind. Day 2 brought with it a couple of big accidents in the afternoon, as firstly the Lotus Lamborghini of Derek Warwick suffered a left front puncture at over 175 miles an hour negotiating Scenes corner. The British driver was lucky to escape with severe concussion, although he would be forced to miss the final 2 days of running, leaving rookie Martin Donnelly to finish running the team's test program alone. The session was red flagged for over an hour as the marshals cleared up the accident, but within 10 minutes of the green flag coming out, there was another stoppage after Roberto Moreno suffered brake failure on the run down to turn 1, travelling at almost 160 miles an hour. The new for 1990 Jerez Porsche took to the rumble strip and hit the tyre wall at a steep angle and stopped very suddenly, with the dazed Brazilian unable to lift himself out of the wrecked car. It was later confirmed he'd had a broken leg and would be out for at least 6 weeks, thus ruling him out of the rest of winter testing and, more importantly, the first 2 races of the year, one of which was his home race in Brazil. Once the green flag was out again, it was the Williams-Renault test driver Mark Blundell who impressed, with the 24-year-old finishing the day in second place behind the Ferrari of Senna. The Brazilian, however, expressed genuine concern about the violence of the 2 accidents that day, saying that they did worry him a little, as there was no warning before something like that happens and it's very dangerous. Day 3 saw Joey Davis take over from Blundell in the Williams, but the 2-time winner struggled for pace, and whilst the McLarens ran well, the day was all about the number 27 Ferrari once more, as 1988 champion Senna topped both morning and afternoon sessions, completing over 98 laps in total, a tremendous improvement for the Scuderia after a 1989 season blighted by reliability issues. The final day belonged to Nigel Mansell, who was fastest overall in the number 5 Williams, whilst teammate Davis, banned for the first 2 races of the season, was a frustrated 6th, having struggled to find a good balance with the new FW13 chassis. Following the FIA's decision to ban Davis for his overly aggressive defensive driving in the final race of last year, Williams had spent most of the winter in discussions with several drivers, and in between the Paul Ricard test and the upcoming 3 days at Jerez, they finally confirmed that IndyCar stars Al Unser Jr. and Michael Andretti would both run for 2 days each alongside regular test driver Mark Blundell, so the team could evaluate who to put in the number 6 car alongside Mansell in America and Brazil. For Unser Jr., the opening day was a relatively positive one, with the American covering 45 laps in the morning but only 15 in the afternoon after transmission failure resulted in the team being unable to get him back out before the end of the session. It was a tough break for Unser Jr., but he ended up second fastest behind Blundell, who was undeniably the star of the day, topping the times in both the morning and the afternoon. The Williams pair beating the McLaren of Piquet by nearly half a second in 3rd place. Blundell's speed and consistency certainly didn't go unnoticed by team boss Frank Williams, who was quick to praise his test driver's performance, even though F1 boss Bernie Ecclestone declared his wish to see either of the Americans get the coveted drive for the exposure it would undoubtedly give the sport. Day 2 saw Andretti and Unser Jr. out for Williams, and with Ferrari electing to sit out this test, preferring to run in private at their own circuit at Fiorano, it was the Renault-powered cars once again who topped the timesheets, with the arrows of Herbert claiming 3rd, ahead of Prost and the Tyrrell of Alesi. Nabbing the quickest time by only 2 1/1000ths of a second ahead of Unser Jr., Michael Andretti had certainly laid his claim for the drive, with his father, 1978 world champion Mario Andretti, declaring that his son was ready for F1, and there were rumours that a deal with Williams had already been struck. For Blundell, though, such gossip was ignored, the young Brit determined to let his driving do the talking as he prepared to go head-to-head with Andretti on the final day and give his own account as to why Williams should choose him to drive the opening 2 races. With McLaren and Arrows, both of whom had impressed greatly in testing so far, electing to mainly run race simulations, the Williams drivers were basically left out front to see who would emerge as the most consistent and set the fastest laps in both morning and the afternoon session. In the end, it was Blundell who topped the times, beating Andretti into second by over 2/10, with Prost third and Alesi fourth. Williams technical director Patrick Head was quick to praise Blundell once more, declaring that the team couldn't ignore his speed as they pondered who was going to part the mantle. With Hunter Jr. seemingly never really being in contention despite his lap times, Williams confirmed that a decision would be made before the Imola test, so the chosen driver could benefit from another stint in the car before the first race. In the days after Jerez, Andretti was full of confidence and declared he was worthy to sit in the car, and then boldly stated that in his firm opinion he should be driving it for the whole season, and that the team should drop their contracted regular driver Joey Davis completely and give the American the ride full time. Many were surprised at Andretti's comments, and whilst no one really believed that he would replace Davis, who had had an up and down first year with the team but had still miraculously won twice in the car, the common belief was that the drive would ultimately go Andretti's way. So it was a shock to many when on the eve of the first day's running at Imola, Williams announced that it was Blundell who had landed the seat instead. A frustrated Andretti admitted he was gutted to have lost the drive, also declaring that in his opinion it was a huge mistake by the team and that they should have gone with someone who had more racing experience if they were really interested in getting decent results. There were comments that, whilst brushed aside by team boss Frank Williams, many felt they were unnecessary, and they'd certainly annoyed Patrick Head, which is never a good thing to do. Meanwhile, on track the team began the first of 3 days looking to put a new spec of the Renault engine through its paces until disaster struck after the first hour of the morning. Starting his 11th lap, Joey Davis was approaching the Ligier of Nicola Larini at an alarming rate, entering Tamburello at over 190 mph. The Williams followed behind before pulling out to the left to swing past when Larini inexplicably moved left also at the last second and hit Davis's right front wheel, sending the Williams skywards. The ensuing accident was terrifying to see, and after the shattered car came to a rest some 500 yards further on from the point of impact, an eerie silence descended all around the circuit, and fears were that there had been a tragic accident. Soon enough, the emergency vehicles were on the scene, and Davis was airlifted to the Maggiore Hospital in nearby Bologna. The accident shocked everyone down the pit lane and led Frank Williams to declare that he was totally disgusted with Larini's driving, and soon the FIA confirmed that they would call an emergency meeting where the Italian's questionable driving would no doubt be discussed. With the team still reeling from the crash, when the session went green once more, Mansell and Williams focused on race simulations, ending the day 6th fastest, whilst the Arrows pair of Herbert and Blundell impressed yet again, setting 4th and 5th fastest times as the all-new Ilmor V10 was put through its paces. It was Piquet who ended the day fastest ahead of Senna and Prost, but as the evening approached, there was relief when news came through that Senna had been to see Joey Davis in the hospital and that he was still heavily sedated with undisclosed injuries, but that he should make a good recovery, although he was likely to be out for at least 3 months. It really was a miracle he survived, and the news really did bring with it a collective sigh of great relief throughout the paddock. Later that night, then came news that Larini had been found guilty of dangerous driving and given an outright 12-month ban by the FIA, a decision that was largely welcomed by many luminaries in the sport. Day 2, and it was all about Mclaren Honda, with Nelson Piquet topping the timesheets in both the morning and the afternoon sessions as the team continued to prove they'd lost none of the speed that had seen them clinch both Drivers' and Constructors' Championship for the last 2 years. Replacing Davis a day earlier than planned, Blundell focused on race simulations along with Mansell as Williams pushed to improve their reliability, which was largely lacking in 1989. The final day saw updates from Ferrari enable Senna to complete a massive 100 laps and to top the timesheets in both sessions ahead of the McLarens of Piquet and Prost, the Arrows of Blundell, and Scuderia teammate Gerhard Berger in 5th. In all, it's been a winter of intrigue, with many firmly believing that Ferrari have now closed the gap to McLaren and that there's nothing between the two teams. Unexpectedly, Jackie Oliver's Arrows have clearly made the massive jump in performance since last year's Australian Grand Prix and are now arguably the 3rd fastest, with Williams a likely 4th, Benetton 5th, and the midfield looks very close yet again, with Lotus and Tyrrell ready to take the fight to the top teams. For many, though, the battle for pre-qualifying looks just as entertaining, with 9 teams and 18 drivers all competing to join the established runners in the 6 available spaces at every Grand Prix. As the winter sun lowered its head for the final time over the Imola paddock and the team transporters were being packed up, the overriding feeling was that despite the serious accidents witnessed over winter testing, the coming season is unquestionably going to be one to remember, which of course begins in a few weeks in America for round 1 of the 1990 Formula One World Championship.